Ultimate is the third and final difficulty level of Grim Dawn, and what every build strives to be able to conquer due to its high-leveled mobs and much better loot when comparing it to Elite difficulty. The difficulty scaling from Elite to Ultimate is quite a large jump, with the reduction of all of your resist by 25%, higher health pools on monsters, and much higher damage numbers, making it quite a challenge for new players to feel comfortable in. I've recently leveled up a second character in the Ultimate difficulty, and have been really dominating it compared to my first character, on which I made quite a few mistakes on. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the steps that I took to prepare for Ultimate difficulty, and hopefully it can help any of you guys watching that are having troubles preparing for it yourself. The first step to Ultimate is a pretty simple one, and involves capping out your resist. Most people who are experienced in action RPGs know how important resists are when it comes to endgame content, and Grim Dawn is absolutely no exception to that. Elite difficulty only reduces the top 5 resists on the character page by 25%, but in Ultimate difficulty, every single resist is reduced by another 25%, which makes it a lot more difficult to try and cap these out. A lot of your resists are going to come from your gear, and we'll go over the gearing process in a bit, but before that, let's go over some of the tools this game gives you to help out with your resist capping. One of the tools that you have to your disposal to cap out resist are augments that can be bought at every faction shop once you reach revered status with them. There's a really well made guide out there that I've been following that sorts every type of resist with their respective augments and component, so you know which faction you need to farm reputation with for which resist. Getting to Revered is pretty simple. Just go to the faction page in-game to see what you need to do to get reputation, and then grind out some of the bounties for quick reputation gain. If you have another character that's already revered with that faction, you can purchase a mandate with them and share it with your other characters. But remember that you can't do the same thing with augments themselves, since they are soulbound. For resist, you'll mainly be looking for the rectangle armor slotted augments, since every single one of those will give you a resist, and every piece of armor can be slotted in with one, giving you many chances for small boosts to any resist to get capped out. The weapon and jewelry augments can sometimes give you resist, but about 90% of them are just there for damage and other defensive stats. Another thing you can use to cap out your resists are components. And components themselves are a super important part of gearing up for your character for Ultimate difficulty. You should try and get your resist as high as you possibly can without using components, by using augments and just gearing up and everything like that, because components are a super useful tool that you can use to give your character some nice offensive boosts and other defensive boosts that will make your build shine. And in some cases such as mine, the component can even be a build divining feature that gives you an ability that you need. Using components for resist in some armor slots isn't the worst thing in the world, and is sometimes necessary, but you just want to try and get it as high as you possibly can without components to see what your options are available to you. You can also use a devotion tree to help cap out your resist, since a lot of the devotions on that tree will give you quite a bit of resist on top of the damage and new skills that thing can give. But you don't have to reorganize your entire devotion build for resist, since you have so many other tools with augments, components, and your gear. And with gear, having a set of epics and legendaries that are good for your build to wear once you hit your mid 80s is the ideal situation, but obviously that option isn't available to everybody, especially if it's your first character or you're just not very lucky with your loot. I really felt like my first character was kind of RNG gated by loot drops until I could feel powerful in Ultimate, and that's a big reason why I started another character. But there are a few things that you can do to minimize this RNG by a little bit. The first thing involves getting revered with a faction that sells items that are good for your build, which shouldn't be a problem if you've already got revered with some to unlock their augments. Factions sell some items that by average aren't usually as powerful as a lot of the legendaries out there available, but are still fairly powerful and are a good stepping stone until you are able to get geared up with your best in slot. A lot of factions also sell blueprints to legendary and epic items that can be really good and completely make your build much more viable. So take a look at some of the faction shops and see what they sell at revered status if any of the loot looks good to you. Another thing you can do to minimize RNG is target farm some monster infrequent drops. Monster infrequent items are items that drop from specific monsters in the world that usually give boost and change the way certain skills and abilities work. They can often be nearly as powerful, if not more powerful and build defining as legendary items themselves, depending on what you're playing. An example of a monster infrequent is the Flesh Warp Defender, a shield that is dropped by the Flesh Warped Vanguards that reduces the cooldown of Oathkeeper's Judgment ability, makes the target hit by them do less damage, and converts it all to fire damage. I'd suggest to go to grimtools.com to search for the abilities that you're using and see if there are any monster infrequent drops that look promising to you, and go target farm those. You're able to target farm these items, which will reduce the RNG of dropping any general items elsewhere in the world by quite a bit and really help your build. If you're still having trouble gearing up, never underestimate the power of rare items you can find on the ground. Make sure you have your loot filters set up to show rare items with your damage type and any other stats that you're looking for, as rares can be really powerful if you happen to roll them with the perfect stats you need for your build, especially if you're lucky enough to get a double rare item with 2 rare prefixes. You're going to want to have an increase of your main damage type on just about every piece of gear you're wearing, but also keep an eye on the resist to make sure that you're capped. The other thing you'll need to keep an eye on gear is health and offensive/defensive ability. You're going to want to keep a high health pool depending on what other defenses your build has, but I think trying to keep it at above 10k is a good goal to aim for. Offensive and defensive ability are also super important. If you keep your eyes off those for a while and let them get down low, you'll find yourself missing a lot of your attacks and getting one shot by a lot of critical strikes pretty often. The amount of offensive/defensive ability needed will differ between all of your builds, but aiming to keep these both above 2k is a good start for most builds. Another thing that you want to keep an eye on is your other defensive mechanics on top of your resistances, armor, health, and defensive ability. In Ultimate, things will be dealing a ton of damage even with capped resist and high armor, so you're going to need multiple layers of defense if you want to survive with that. Examples of extra layers of defense involve blocking, dodging, life leech, damage absorption, effects that proc off being hit, and much more. You're probably going to want to stack multiple layers of these depending on how safe you want to be and what kind of content you want to be doing in Ultimate. I'll give you an example with my build that I talked about earlier, and you're probably seeing gameplay of in the background right now. Since the layers of defense he has is 40% chance to dodge hits, the ability to freeze mobs with my main damage dealers, giant triplets healing me when I'm hit, turtle shell giving me damage absorption once I reach 40% health, and the ability to lower defensive ability and speed of mobs around me with the Veil of Shadow aura. I might have gone a bit overboard with defenses for my build, but it's just personal playstyle preferences. You're definitely going to want to layer some defenses for every build, so take a look at your class's skill tree for defensive passives or abilities you can slot in, and check your devotion tree to see if there are any defensive points that you can easily get with your current setup, and you'll find yourself surviving Ultimate much easier. If you find you're not dealing enough damage in Ultimate difficulty, just take a look at your devotion and skill tree to see what you can switch out for more damage, or just compare the numbers of skills to find out if you picked a subpar skill. You can do this by going to the Grim Tools website I mentioned before and just going and leveling up the abilities on the build calculator, because you might have just picked the ability that just is not good, unfortunately. Maybe it's good with super rare gear, maybe you just don't have it built right now, but there are just some abilities in the game that are much less gear dependent, so go check that out. Another thing that you need to try and get is the ability to reduce resistances, since some of the enemies in Ultimates can get up to 94% resist on some elements, making them near impossible to kill for certain builds without resistance shredding. If all else fails and you are still having trouble in Ultimate even after following all of these steps, you can always do what I did and make a new character to try again. It sucks to say, but unfortunately just some builds aren't very good, especially if you're not able to get the super rare gear needed to make some abilities work and some builds work. Grim Dawn just has so many options available to you, so it's going to be a learning process to discover all of the things you can do to make your character viable. Once you learn more about the game, you can always just go back and revisit that character and use what you learned to make it viable for all content. So thank you guys for watching. I just wanted to make a quick video for you, and I hope this helped anybody that was having problems, since a few people did come into my stream and asked for tips on how to survive Ultimate. If you have any other questions or feedback on this, you can come check out my stream as well. I'll leave that in the description, or just leave a comment, I'll read it. I read all my comments, even if I don't reply to all of them. So have a good day, guys. A build guide is going to come out for this build that you're seeing in the background within the next week, once I get them all geared up and set up, but right now this is just kind of a little teaser video for it, so stay tuned for that.